He looked like nobody. That was the point. Across a candlelit table in one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, Nathan Cross sat in a faded jacket that had seen better decades, hands calloused from years of working with tiny gears and delicate clock springs. And the woman across from him had already decided, politely, without cruelty, the way beautiful and powerful people sometimes do, that this date was a mistake. She was wrong about almost everything she thought she knew about him. And in approximately 11 minutes, armed men would come through the front entrance of Marcello's fine dining, and the quiet clock repairman with the tired eyes would do things that would make Victoria Sterling question every assumption she had ever built her life upon. But first, the date. Before we go any further, if you're new here, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because the stories we tell here don't stop at comfortable endings. Drop a like if you want Nathan's story to reach someone who needs it tonight, and comment below with your city and country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. People are watching from places I never expected, and every comment you leave tells me we're not done yet. Now, let's go back to that restaurant. The reservation had been made under someone else's name. That was the first thing Nathan noticed when he walked into Marcello's. The maitre d' checked the book twice, lips pressed together in a thin line of professional confusion, before recovering smoothly and leading Nathan to a corner table near the far window. Someone had rearranged the booking. Small thing. Probably nothing. Nathan filed it away in the back of his mind the way he filed everything, quietly, without expression, the way you learn to do when your life has depended more than once on noticing what other people decide isn't worth noticing. He was early. He was always early. He ordered water and looked around the room with the particular kind of relaxed attention that looked, to anyone watching, like a man simply taking in an expensive restaurant he probably couldn't afford. White tablecloths, low lighting designed by someone who understood that wealthy people preferred to be seen in a forgiving glow. A string quartet in the far corner playing something Nathan couldn't name. The kind of place where the menu didn't list prices because if you needed to ask, the question itself was the answer. Nathan had been to nicer places. He'd also been to significantly worse ones. And he didn't mean that in the way people meant it when they were trying to sound interesting at dinner parties. He checked the exits. 2 visible, 1 probable through the kitchen. Staff-to-patron ratio higher than normal for a Tuesday evening. He counted 17 people in the dining room, not including staff. 2 men at the bar who hadn't touched their drinks in the 12 minutes he'd been sitting there. A woman near the entrance who kept glancing at her phone but never actually appeared to be reading anything on it. Probably nothing. He straightened the silverware. It was crooked and it bothered him. Victoria Sterling arrived at 7:14, 4 minutes late, which he later learned was unusual for her. She walked through the entrance the way certain people walk into rooms, not with performance, not with the kind of look-at-me energy that announced itself loudly, but with the quiet authority of someone who had simply never needed to announce herself. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. Of course he did. Her face had been on the cover of Chicago Business Monthly twice in the past year. Forbes had called her the most influential woman in Midwest finance before she turned 30. She'd built Sterling Capital from a single office and 3 clients into something that now managed more money than the GDP of several small countries. She was wearing a dark blue dress that probably cost more than Nathan's car. Her hair was down. She looked, he thought, genuinely tired beneath all of it. The kind of tired that expensive clothes and perfect posture can almost but never quite conceal. She spotted him at the corner table. Something crossed her face, quick, controlled, gone in less than a second. He caught it anyway. This is him? He stood when she reached the table. Old habit. She extended her hand and he shook it, and her grip was firm in the way of someone who had learned early that people, men especially, sometimes needed to be reminded through a handshake that they were talking to someone who meant business. "Victoria," she said. "Nathan." He pulled her chair out. She looked briefly surprised, then sat. The first 60 seconds of any blind date are, Nathan had discovered in his limited experience with them, essentially a mutual audition conducted under the polite fiction that it isn't. Victoria glanced at his jacket, at his hands, at the water glass he'd been nursing for 15 minutes. He watched her process all of it and arrive at a conclusion, and he didn't blame her for arriving there. He'd have arrived at the same place with the same information. So, she said, opening the menu with the practiced ease of someone who ate in restaurants like this regularly, Daniel told me you fix clocks. Repair and restore, Nathan said. Mostly antiques. People bring me things that stopped working 20, 30 years ago, sometimes longer. And they can be fixed? Most things can. You just have to understand how they were built and what broke them. Usually it's not as complicated as it looks. Victoria nodded the way people nod when they're being polite. That sounds... She paused, searching for the word. Peaceful. It is, he said. That's mostly why I do it. She looked up from the menu. Mostly? My daughter likes taking things apart. She's 7. I needed a job where that particular habit was considered an asset rather than a problem. Something shifted slightly in Victoria's expression. Not much. Enough. You have a daughter. Lily. She's currently with my neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, who is 81 years old and has approximately no ability to say no to her. They're probably watching a nature documentary and eating cereal for dinner. That's... Victoria smiled. It was the first real smile, small and quick. That's actually kind of lovely. Mrs. Kowalski thinks so. Lily thinks so. My dentist has concerns. Victoria laughed, a short, genuine sound that she seemed slightly surprised to find herself making. She set the menu down. Nathan noticed she'd chosen quickly, which meant she'd been here before and already knew what she wanted. They ordered. The conversation moved the way first date conversations move when both parties are reasonably intelligent and reasonably guarded. Safe territory, surface observations, the careful exchange of edited biographies. Victoria talked about the company in the measured way of someone who had learned to discuss work without letting it become the entire conversation. She asked about Lily with what seemed like genuine curiosity. Nathan answered honestly and without performance, which was the only way he knew how to answer anything. At some point, the food arrived. Nathan ate without looking at his plate. He was watching the bar. The 2 men who hadn't touched their drinks had been joined by a third. All 3 were now positioned with clear sightlines to the corner table. None of them were looking at each other, which was itself a kind of coordination. Trained or experienced people don't look at each other for confirmation. They don't need to. The woman near the entrance had moved closer to the dining room. A member of the waitstaff Nathan hadn't seen earlier appeared near the kitchen corridor, a young man in the right uniform, but his shoes were wrong. Restaurant staff on their feet all evening wore comfortable, worn-in footwear. This man's shoes were new, dark, low profile, the kind of shoe you'd choose if you needed to move quietly and quickly. Nathan took a sip of his water. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." "You've barely looked at your food." "I'm a slow eater," he said. "Tell me about the vote tomorrow." Victoria went still. "Excuse me?" "The board vote. Daniel mentioned it when he called me last week. Said you'd been under a lot of pressure. Didn't give details. I'm not asking for details. I'm just..." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I'm asking if it's the kind of pressure that follows you around." She studied him for a moment with the direct, assessing look of someone who had spent years in rooms full of people who wanted things from her and had learned to identify the shape of a request before it was fully formed. Whatever she found in his face, it seemed to satisfy something. "It's always that kind," she said quietly. "When you build something, it never really leaves you alone. The pressure just changes shape." "Yeah," Nathan said. "I know what that's like." "Clock repair must be more stressful than it sounds," he smiled. "Something like that." The string quartet finished a piece and started another. A couple near the center of the room laughed at something. The candles on each table threw soft, unsteady light across the white tablecloths. Nathan set his fork down with the careful deliberateness of someone placing a chess piece. "Victoria," he said, "I need you to listen to me and not react visibly to what I'm about to say. Can you do that?" She blinked. What?" "Don't look around the room. Don't look toward the bar. Keep your eyes on me and keep your expression where it is." His voice was completely level. No urgency, no performance, just a calm, flat, specific instruction. "There are at least 4 people in this restaurant who are not here to eat. They've been watching our table since before you arrived. Staff positions have changed twice in the last 20 minutes in a way that doesn't make operational sense for a restaurant this size. The reservation was altered, and someone, he said this without changing his tone at all, is about to do something about it. Victoria stared at him. "You're serious," she said. "I'm afraid so. You're a clock repairman. I'm also a few other things." He folded his napkin and set it beside his plate. "Has anyone contacted you in the last 48 hours that you didn't expect? Security changes? Staff replacements on your detail?" Her face changed. Slowly, and then all at once, the way a lock turns. "Damien, my head of security. He changed tonight's driver assignment this afternoon. I thought it was routine." "When did he tell you about this dinner?" She stopped. "Yesterday morning." Nathan nodded once, absorbed that. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do. When I tell you to move, you move exactly where I point you. You don't hesitate, you don't ask questions, you don't stop to get your coat. You trust me completely for the next few minutes, and then afterward you can decide exactly how insane you think I am. This is..." She exhaled through her nose, sharp and controlled, the breath of someone who is frightened and refusing to show it fully. "This is not a normal first date." "No," Nathan agreed. "It really isn't." He watched the front entrance. The door opened. 4 men came through it hard, and the restaurant's comfortable Tuesday evening noise, cutlery, quiet conversation, string quartet, shattered into screaming in the space of a single second. 2 of the men from the bar were already moving. The woman near the entrance had produced something from her jacket. The man with the wrong shoes stepped out of the corridor near the kitchen with his hand behind his back. Nathan was already moving. He was out of his chair before the first table went over, one hand finding Victoria's arm and pulling her down and behind him in a single motion that was too fast and too precise to be anything accidental. She hit the floor behind the upturned table, and he was crouching in front of her, and the first attacker who rounded the corner toward them got Nathan's elbow across his throat with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had done it before. Not in practice, but in the kind of situations where doing it incorrectly meant not coming home. The man dropped. Nathan took what he was carrying. "Stay low," Nathan said, completely calm. The way a person is calm when calm is a decision they've made and maintained under conditions most people never encounter. "Stay directly behind me." Across the restaurant, people were running for the exits, dishes breaking, chairs overturning. The second attacker came in from the left, and Nathan moved to meet him with the table between them, used the edge of it as a fulcrum, drove the corner into the man's sternum, and followed it with something fast and controlled to the side of his knee, clean, targeted, designed to stop without destroying. The man went down hard and stayed there. One of the men near the entrance was shouting something, a name, Victoria's name, Victoria Sterling. "We just want the woman. Nobody else needs to get hurt." Nathan heard that and understood several things simultaneously, the way he used to understand tactical situations, in fragments that assembled themselves into a complete picture faster than conscious thought. This wasn't an assassination. The weapons he could see weren't positioned for killing. They were positioned for extraction, for control, for moving a specific person from point A to point B without creating a body that would require explaining. This was a kidnapping. He took Victoria's hand. "The kitchen," he said. "Nathan? Kitchen, now." And she went. Because something in the steadiness of his voice, not loud, not urgent, not the voice of someone performing confidence they didn't have, told her, in the part of the brain that processes threat before language catches up, that this man knew exactly what he was doing. They moved through the chaos toward the kitchen corridor. Nathan kept his body angled between Victoria and the room, kept his eyes cutting left and right with the particular economy of someone trained to track multiple threat vectors simultaneously. A third attacker stepped out of the kitchen doorway directly ahead, and Nathan hit him twice, shoulder, then the side of the head, with the controlled force of someone calibrating impact rather than reacting to adrenaline. The man slumped against the doorframe. Nathan stepped over him and pulled Victoria through. The kitchen was empty. Staff had scattered. The stainless steel surfaces reflected the overhead fluorescence in cold, flat sheets of light. Nathan moved through without slowing, past the prep stations and the long bank of stoves, toward the service exit at the back that he'd identified when they'd first arrived, because identifying exits was something he did the way other people checked the weather. He hit the push bar on the door. Cold Chicago night air. The narrow service alley behind Marcello's, lit by a single overhead bulb, dumpsters to the left, a chain-link gate at the far end. Victoria came through the door behind him, breathing hard but controlled, her heels loud on the wet asphalt. She stopped, looked at him. In the pale light of the alley, with the muffled sounds of chaos still filtering through the restaurant walls, Nathan Cross stood perfectly still, not shaking, not breathing hard. His jacket was torn at one shoulder. There was a small cut above his eyebrow from somewhere in the past 90 seconds. He was scanning the alley with those calm, quiet eyes that had been watching the restaurant all night and seeing things she'd completely missed. "Who are you?" Victoria said. Her voice was steady, just barely. Nathan touched the cut above his eye absently, looked at his fingertip, looked back at her. "I told you," he said. "I fix clocks." She stared at him for a long moment. The city hummed around them, distant sirens somewhere, not close enough yet. "That," she said, "is clearly not the complete answer." "No," Nathan admitted. "It's not." He looked toward the gate at the end of the alley, already reading it, already planning. "But right now we need to move. And I need you to tell me everything you know about the man who changed your security schedule this afternoon." She pulled off her heels without being asked, a pragmatic, decisive gesture that told him something useful about her, and held them in one hand. "Walk," he said. "Not run. Running draws attention." She fell into step beside him. "Damien Holt," she said, and her voice, saying that name, had a strange quality to it, the specific flatness of someone beginning to understand something they very much wish they didn't have to understand. Nathan listened, watched the street ahead, kept his body between her and the mouth of the alley. The sirens were getting closer now, but Nathan wasn't waiting for them. Whoever had organized this evening had information they shouldn't have had. They'd known the restaurant. They'd known the reservation. They'd placed people inside before Victoria ever arrived. That meant the perimeter of people she trusted included someone who wasn't trustworthy. And until Nathan knew exactly how deep that went, the last place either of them could afford to be was anywhere her security detail could find them. The gate at the end of the alley opened onto a side street. Nathan pushed through it first, checked left and right. Ordinary Chicago night. Headlights, a bodega lit up yellow on the corner, a man walking a dog half a block away. "This way," Nathan said. Victoria Sterling, one of the most powerful women in Chicago, the woman who ran boardrooms and quarterly earnings calls and negotiations that moved markets, followed a clock repairman in a torn jacket into the dark without hesitation. She hated how much sense it made. The side street Nathan led them to was the kind of Chicago block that the city's glossy tourism photographs never bothered to include. Narrow, functional, bracketed by the backs of buildings that faced more important streets. A laundromat on the corner with its lights still on, drums turning behind fogged glass. A taqueria with a hand-lettered sign and 3 plastic chairs on the sidewalk. The smell of exhaust and cold lake air and something frying somewhere above them. Victoria walked beside Nathan in her bare feet on the wet sidewalk and didn't complain. He noticed that, filed it away. "Put these on." He stopped at a parked delivery van and crouched, unlacing his shoes. "I'm not taking your shoes. They're too big, but they're better than what you've got, which is nothing." He stood and held them out. "I'll be fine." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not gratitude, not exactly. Something more complicated than that. She took the shoes. He walked in his socks and didn't mention it again. "Tell me about tonight," he said as they moved. "Your original schedule. What were you supposed to be doing before this dinner?" "I had a 6 o'clock with my legal team, running through the proxy documentation for tomorrow's vote." She was holding her own heels in one hand, swinging them slightly as she walked, a gesture so automatic she probably wasn't aware of it. "The dinner was a late addition. Daniel arranged it last week. He said he thought I needed to get out of my own head for a few hours." "And Damien knew about it." "Damien knows everything about my schedule. That's his job." She said it flatly, without defensiveness. The flatness of someone who had already started doing arithmetic they didn't want to do. When did you last vet his people? The staff under him? That's... She stopped herself. That's what he's supposed to do. Nathan nodded, didn't say anything. Don't do that, Victoria said. Do what? That thing where you let the silence make your point for you. I wasn't. You were. She pulled his too large shoe back onto her heel where it had slipped. I know what you're saying. I'm saying it to myself. I don't need the commentary. Fair enough. They kept walking. Nathan steered them left, away from the direction the first sirens had come from, moving at the pace of two people who had somewhere to be rather than two people who were fleeing something. A slight but important distinction in how you read on the street. His phone was in his jacket pocket. He took it out, stared at it for a second, then put it back. Yours off? He asked. What? Your phone. Is it off? Not silenced, off. Victoria understood immediately. She reached into the small clutch she'd somehow held onto through everything and pulled out her phone. Powered it down. Dropped it back in. They were tracking me through it, she said. Not a question. Possibly. Or through Damien's access to your location data. Same result. He glanced at a street sign. Either way, off is better than on for the next few hours. Where are we going? It was a reasonable question, and he didn't have a fully formed answer yet, which he found mildly irritating. His mind was running options in parallel. Hotel was bad, required ID, and Damien's resources could run credit card flags. Victoria's apartment was compromised by definition. His place was not on any list connected to Victoria Sterling, but taking a woman he'd had dinner with once to his apartment above a clock repair shop in Pilsen had its own category of complications. There's a place, he said. Give me a minute. You don't know. I'm deciding between options. That's not the same as knowing. No, he agreed. It's not. She was quiet for a moment, then, you're actually thinking, aren't you? You're not stalling. You're just running through it. Yeah. Okay. She said it simply. Take your minute. He thought about what she'd said earlier, the board vote, the legal team, the proxy documentation. Whatever was happening tonight was not random. You didn't deploy 6 or 7 trained people to a restaurant, coordinate timing down to the minute, place assets inside before the target arrived for something random. That kind of operation cost money and planning, and more importantly, it cost a reason. The kind of reason that was large enough and time-sensitive enough to justify the risk. The vote tomorrow. Victoria Sterling controlled the majority voting power at Sterling Capital through her family trust, but majority wasn't the same as unanimous, and Nathan had enough understanding of corporate structure to know that a proxy vote with specific trigger conditions could reroute that control under the right circumstances. If the trust's named beneficiary was incapacitated, or missing, or could be declared incompetent by a quorum of board members, they hadn't been trying to kill her, they'd been trying to make her disappear for approximately 14 hours. Just long enough. They need you gone until after the vote, Nathan said. Victoria turned her head sharply. That's what I was thinking. Who benefits if you're not in that boardroom tomorrow morning? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice had gone quiet in a particular way, the voice of someone watching something they'd built being described as vulnerable. Calvin Mercer. He's a board member. He's been pushing for a restructure for 8 months. He wants to spin off the asset management division and install his own people at the top. I've been blocking it. And with you gone? He'd have the votes. He's been working the board quietly for months. She exhaled. I thought it was just politics, boardroom maneuvering. People do it. You stay ahead of it. You didn't know how far he'd go. Nobody does that, she said, with something raw in her voice now. Nobody actually... This is not how it works. You fight in boardrooms. You file motions. You don't... She stopped, collected herself. You don't send people into a restaurant with zip ties and... She stopped again. Nathan looked at her sidelong. You okay? No. Direct and uncomplicated. I'm not okay. I'm walking barefoot through Chicago in a ruined dress with a man I met 2 hours ago because someone I trusted for 3 years apparently arranged for me to be grabbed. She looked straight ahead. I'm about as far from okay as I think I've ever been. That's a reasonable position to be in. Is it always like this for you? The question surprised him. What? Being calm in all of that. Back there, she gestured vaguely behind them. Is that something you turn on, or is it just how you are? Nathan thought about it honestly for a moment. It's something you build, he said, over a long time, under conditions that aren't particularly enjoyable. He paused, and then at some point it just becomes the default. What conditions? He didn't answer right away. The laundromat fell behind them. The taqueria. They turned a corner and the street opened slightly, a wider avenue with more traffic, more light, more cover in the ordinary noise of the city. I was in the Navy for 12 years, he said. Special operations, SEAL teams. Victoria stopped walking. He made it 2 steps before he realized and turned back. She was standing on the sidewalk looking at him with an expression he recognized from the moment in the restaurant when he told her not to react visibly. That particular combination of adjusting and recalibrating and not quite landing on stable ground yet. Her hair had come partly loose at some point in the last 40 minutes. There was a small tear in the side of her dress. She looked nothing like the woman who had walked into Marcello's, and he wasn't sure if that was better or worse. You were a Navy SEAL, she said. Retired? Yes. And you repair clocks? Also yes. Those are... She pressed her lips together. Those are not 2 things people put on the same resume. I'm not looking for work. Nathan, her voice dropped slightly. Why? Why clocks? Why? She gestured at his general existence. Why any of this, if you had that? He started walking again, slowly enough that she fell into step. Because Lily needed someone to come home to, he said. Her mother died when Lily was 2. Car accident, nothing dramatic, nothing that makes a good story, just a Tuesday morning, and then she was gone. He said it the way he'd learned to say it over 5 years of being asked, directly, without the softening flourishes that people sometimes added to tragedy to make it easier to hear. It wasn't easier to hear. That was the truth of it. After that, I had a choice. Stay in and have my daughter raised by a series of babysitters and relatives who all loved her, but none of whom were her father. Or get out. So you got out. So I got out. He glanced at her. The clocks were my father's thing, originally. He had a repair shop in Milwaukee. I spent summers there as a kid. Turned out I had a head for it. A small pause. Also, it's quiet. After 12 years of the opposite of quiet, that mattered. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had shifted into something different, less guarded or guarded in a different direction. I misjudged you when you walked in tonight. I know, it's fine. It's not, actually. Victoria, but I looked at the jacket and the hands and I thought... She stopped. I thought, this is a kind man who has nothing to offer me, and this evening is going to be very polite and very short. A beat. I was doing the thing I hate when people do it to me. Everyone does that thing, Nathan said. Nobody's above it. That doesn't make it okay. No, he agreed, but it makes it human. They walked another block in a silence that was, for the first time since the restaurant, not entirely tense. Something had shifted in the chemistry of it. Not resolved. Nothing was resolved. They were still 2 people with no safe place to go and at least one well-funded enemy behind them. But different. Nathan had been turning the question of destination over in his mind and had arrived at the only answer that made sense. My shop, he said. Pilsen. It's not connected to you in any way. Damien doesn't know you're with me. As far as his operation is concerned, the extraction failed and you ran. They'll be looking at hotels, at your friends' addresses, at anyone in your security contacts. A clock repair shop. It has a back apartment. It's secure, more than it looks. And I have a landline. She raised an eyebrow. A landline. I have a 7-year-old who calls me from school sometimes, and I don't trust cellular infrastructure. He paused. Also, the landline is harder to monitor without physical access. You're actually serious. I'm always serious. That's... She almost smiled. That's either very reassuring or very concerning, and I can't decide which. They found a cab 3 blocks over. Old Chicago habit, hailing a physical cab with cash, which Nathan had in his wallet, which he always had because there were people in his line of former work who had rules about electronic payment, and those rules had a way of calcifying into permanent habits. He gave the driver a cross street 2 blocks from the shop rather than the address itself. Old reflex. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and old vinyl. Victoria sat beside him in the back, his shoes still on her feet, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold that had come through the restaurant incident and the alley and the 20 minutes of sidewalk. She was holding together well, significantly better than most people would have. Nathan noticed that too, the way he noticed everything, and filed it in a different category than the tactical information, a category he didn't have a clean label for. He found an old jacket in the cab's back seat pocket, left by a previous passenger, charcoal gray, too large. He handed it to her without comment. She took it without comment. Put it on. The cab crossed the river and moved south through night traffic. "Rachel," Victoria said suddenly. "Who?" "My assistant, Rachel Brooks. She'll be trying to reach me. She monitors my schedule. She'll know something went wrong by now." She turned to him, and for the first time since they'd left the restaurant, there was something new in her face. Not fear exactly, but a specific worry. The kind you have for other people rather than yourself. "She's loyal. She's the most loyal person in my entire organization. If Damien thinks she knows something, does she?" "She knows everything. She's been with me for 4 years. She has access to every calendar entry, every security briefing, every—" She stopped. "If they think she can identify what happened tonight, they'll try to isolate her." "Can you reach her?" "Not without a phone." Nathan thought about that. "When we get to the shop," he said, "landline. We reach her through a number they won't have flagged, not her cell, not her office line." He looked at her. "Does she have a home number? Something that's not in your official contact directory?" Victoria thought. "Her mother's house. In Evanston." "Rachel stays there sometimes. I have the number memorized. She made me memorize it when I hired her. She said in case of emergency, use the one number nobody else would know to look for." "She sounds like someone who thinks ahead." "She's smarter than half my board," said without any apparent awareness of how much that revealed. The cab pulled up to the corner Nathan had specified. He paid in cash, added a tip that was generous without being memorable, and got out. Victoria followed. The block was quiet. Pilsen at this hour was residential quiet rather than dead quiet. A few windows lit up, someone's television audible 2 floors above them, the distant bass of a sound system from a party somewhere east. Cross Repair occupied the ground floor of a narrow 2-story building that had once been a hardware store, then a printing business, then a series of things that hadn't quite worked out before Nathan had leased it 6 years ago and refinished the floors and replaced the windows and hung a small wooden sign that said simply, "Cross. Clocks and watches. Restoration." The front window held 3 antique clocks of different sizes, all running, all accurate, because Nathan had a particular intolerance for inaccuracy in the one area he could control. He let them in through the side entrance, the door that opened onto the narrow gap between buildings, rather than the street-facing front, which had a lock he'd installed himself, and which was considerably more substantial than it appeared. 3 bolts, a bar lock at the base. Not because he kept anything valuable in the front, but because Lily sometimes slept in the back apartment when Mrs. Kowalski needed a rest, and Nathan Cross did not do things halfway when it came to his daughter's safety. Inside, the shop smelled of machine oil and old wood and something faintly metallic, the accumulated scent of decades of small mechanisms, of springs and gears, and the particular old metal smell of antique brass. The workbench ran along the left wall, lit by a long fluorescent fixture, covered in the organized scatter of someone who knew exactly where everything was, even if it didn't look that way to visitors. Magnifying lenses on articulated arms, rows of tiny drawers labeled in Nathan's cramped handwriting, 3 clocks in various states of disassembly, their components laid out on felt pads with the careful geometry of someone who could rebuild them blindfolded. Victoria stood in the middle of the shop and looked around. She didn't say anything right away. There was something in her face that Nathan caught and then looked away from, something like she was recalibrating again, but this time on a different level. Not adjusting her threat assessment, adjusting something else. Phone's in the back, Nathan said. Come on. The apartment behind the shop was small in the honest way that small apartments are small. Not charming small, not efficiently small, but the small of a man who spent most of his non-parenting hours at the workbench in the front. A kitchen with a table that had one of Lily's drawings taped to the wall above it. A crayon rendering of what appeared to be a robot, or possibly a horse, labeled in careful 7-year-old printing, Datey and Lily. A couch with one cushion slightly more compressed than the others from habitual use. A bookshelf that held equal parts technical manuals on horology and children's chapter books in 2 different sizes. A landline phone on the kitchen counter, cream-colored, old enough that a younger person might have called it vintage if they were being kind. Nathan handed her the receiver. She dialed from memory. It rang 4 times. 5. Victoria's grip on the receiver tightened incrementally, then, "Hello?" A woman's voice, cautious, the wariness of someone who doesn't recognize a number. "Rachel." Victoria said it quietly, with the specific relief of someone who had been holding their breath without realizing it. A pause on the other end, then a fast exhale. "Victoria. Oh, thank God, Where are you? What happened? The restaurant is all over the scanner. There are police, and Damien has been calling me every 15 minutes saying there was a security incident and you're missing and I need to—" "Rachel." Victoria's voice was steady and low and very clear. "Stop. Listen to me. I'm safe. I'm somewhere safe with someone I trust." A beat. "Who?" "His name is Nathan Cross. She glanced at Nathan across the kitchen. "He was my date tonight." Another pause. "Your date? I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're telling me you were rescued by a blind date." "That's an accurate summary, yes." Nathan watched Victoria speak to her assistant with the odd sensation of hearing himself described from the outside. There was something in the way Victoria said "someone I trust" that landed differently than it might have 20 minutes ago. She didn't know him. They'd spent less than 2 hours in each other's company, and the majority of that had involved armed men and emergency exits. Trust built that fast was either incredibly well-founded or incredibly reckless. And he wasn't sure which it was, and wasn't entirely sure she was either. He listened to the shape of the conversation without listening to every word, that particular partial attention of someone who is simultaneously doing something else, which in this case was pulling up the floor grate in the corner of the kitchen, retrieving a waterproof case from the space beneath it, and checking its contents. Backup phone, burner, untraceable. A small amount of cash, more than what he'd had in his wallet. A USB drive. A compact first aid kit which he pulled out and set on the counter for the cut above his eye, which had dried but probably needed cleaning. "Damien called you," Victoria was saying. "Tell me exactly what he said. Word for word, as close as you can." Nathan began cleaning the cut above his eye in the narrow mirror above the kitchen sink, half listening, processing. Rachel's account came through in pieces. Damien had contacted Rachel approximately 12 minutes after the incident at the restaurant, before the police were even fully on scene, which was itself a notable detail. He told her there had been a security breach, that unknown attackers had disrupted a public event Victoria had attended, and that Victoria had fled the scene in an unknown direction. He'd told Rachel to stay put, not to contact anyone, and to route all incoming calls to his office line. When Nathan heard that last part, he turned away from the mirror. "He told her to route calls to him," he said quietly. Victoria caught it immediately. She relayed it to Rachel, then listened, nodded. She hadn't done it yet. She was waiting to hear from me first. "Smart," Nathan said. "Tell her not to. Tell her not to contact Damien at all. And tell her she needs to leave wherever she is, not her apartment, not the office. Somewhere Damien's people wouldn't know to look." Victoria relayed this. There was a brief, sharp exchange on the other end, Rachel's voice rising slightly. The particular sound of someone who had been competent and in control for 4 years, suddenly being told that the framework she'd been operating within was compromised. But she steadied quickly. That steadying, Nathan thought, was probably what had kept her employed for 4 years by a woman who didn't suffer unreliable people. "Her sister's place," Victoria said to Nathan. In Logan Square. Damien doesn't have it. Good. Tell her to go now. Don't pack much. Don't use a car she's used before if she can help it. You're very... Victoria started, then stopped, then said it anyway. You're very good at this. I spent a long time being very good at this, Nathan said. It's not a compliment I take particular pleasure in. She held his gaze for a moment, then went back to the phone. The conversation with Rachel lasted another 4 minutes. There was one moment near the end where Victoria's voice dropped low and she turned slightly away, and Nathan didn't try to hear what was said. That part was between them. When she hung up, she stood with her hand still on the receiver for a moment, then turned and leaned against the counter and looked at him with that direct, assessing look again, the one that had categorized him at dinner and found him insufficient, and which was now clearly running a different calculation. Rachel said something, Victoria said slowly. She said Damien got a phone call this morning, very early, before the office opened. From a number she didn't recognize, she saw it on the shared call log by accident. She mentioned it to him, and he said it was a vendor. She didn't think anything of it. A pause. Calvin Mercer's personal assistant works early hours. Rachel knows because they've coordinated scheduling before. Nathan set the first aid kit down. Did she keep that log? She keeps everything. She has a backup copy on a personal cloud account that's not synced to Sterling's systems. Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. She's careful. I trained her to be careful. Can she access it from her sisters? Yes. Nathan nodded slowly. The picture was coming together, not complete, but enough of it visible to begin to understand the shape. Damien Holt had received instructions from Calvin Mercer's direction early that morning. The same morning, Victoria's security schedule had been altered. The same morning, the dinner reservation at Marcello's had been quietly rearranged by someone with access to Victoria's private calendar. The chain was there. They just needed it on paper, and they needed to stay alive and free until they could do something with it. Try to sleep, Nathan said. A few hours if you can. The couch is... He glanced at it. It's functional. There's a blanket in the closet. Victoria looked at him like he'd suggested something mildly absurd. Sleep. You won't be useful tomorrow if you're running on pure adrenaline and expensive dinner. You barely ate. Were you always this pragmatic, or did the Navy do that to you? My mother, mostly, Nathan said. The Navy just reinforced it. She almost laughed. Didn't quite get there. What are you going to do? There's a back entrance to the restaurant, he said. The service corridor we came through. There's a surveillance system in that building. I saw the camera housings. Backup drives. Almost certainly hardwired rather than cloud-based. Because the owner is a particular kind of old-school Italian restaurateur who doesn't trust things he can't hold in his hand. He was pulling on a dark jacket from the hook behind the kitchen door. If Damien's people haven't already pulled those drives, there's footage of tonight that puts his assets inside that restaurant before we arrived. Victoria straightened. I'm coming. You're not. Nathan, Victoria. He said it evenly, without force but without give either. If something goes wrong and you're with me, you're the target. If something goes wrong and you're here, you're a woman in a clock shop that nobody knows to look for. He picked up the burner phone and set it on the counter beside her. You have Rachel's number. You have the landline. The door locks are, I'll show you before I leave. Don't open the door for anyone. And if you hear anything wrong before I'm back, go out through the shop window on the east side and down the fire escape to the alley. She looked at the fire escape direction with an expression that was not quite eye-rolling but was in the vicinity of it. You've already mapped the exits in your own apartment. It's a habit. That's not a habit, Nathan. That's a lifestyle. He picked up his keys, paused at the kitchen doorway. Is there a number I can reach Rachel at? Not her cell. Victoria recited it from memory. He wrote it on a scrap of paper from the bench. She noticed he wrote it in a small, cramped shorthand that looked more like notation than actual words. 3 hours, he said. Maybe less. If I'm not back in 4, call Rachel and tell her to take what she has to a federal field office. Not city police, federal. Do you understand? Federal, not city. She said it back cleanly. Why not city? Because we don't know yet how far Damien's reach goes, and city jurisdictions can be managed more easily than federal ones. A pause. This is hopefully overcautious. I expect to be back in 2 hours. Hopefully, she repeated. I'm being honest with you. I know, she said. I know you are. Something in her face, not softening exactly, but settling, like she was adjusting to the weight of the evening, figuring out how to carry it. Be careful. Nathan looked at her for a moment, standing in his kitchen in a torn blue dress and a stranger's jacket and shoes 2 sizes too large, arms crossed against the cold of the unheated apartment, hair loose, mascara slightly damaged by the evening's events, and thought that she looked right now more real than she had across any candlelit table. "Lock the door behind me," he said. "Both bolts." He went out through the side entrance. She heard the sound of his footsteps go quiet, and then the lock on the other side of the door engaged. Victoria stood in the kitchen of a clock repairman's apartment in Pilsen, listening to the quiet ticking of the various timepieces on the other side of the wall, dozens of them, all in conversation with each other, keeping time in their different voices, and understood with a clarity that was almost physical that the world she'd woken up in that morning no longer existed in its previous form. Everything she'd believed about who protected her, who served her interests, who stood on her side of the line, all of it had been rearranged in the space of a few hours by a man who noticed exits and wore a faded jacket and had a 7-year-old who thought horses and robots were interchangeable. She sat down on the couch, pulled the blanket from the closet Nathan had indicated, looked at the crayon drawing on the kitchen wall, Daddy and Lily, in careful, earnest letters, and felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't name precisely and didn't try to. The clocks kept ticking. Outside, the city went about its ordinary night, indifferent and enormous, and fully unaware that in a restaurant not too far from here, a man in a torn jacket and sock feet was making his way back through a service alley to collect evidence against people who had spent months planning a betrayal and doing it with the same quiet focus he brought to everything, the kind of focus that wasn't dramatic, that didn't announce itself, that just got the thing done. Victoria didn't sleep, but she tried. He was back in 140 minutes. Victoria heard the side door before she heard his footsteps, the specific sequence of the locks disengaging, 3 bolts in the order she'd watched him demonstrate before he left, and then his voice through the door before he opened it. "It's me." 2 words, low and flat. She was already off the couch. He came in carrying a small black hard drive and a look on his face that she was beginning to learn meant he'd found something he hadn't entirely expected. "You got it," she said. "Restaurant owner keeps his backup drives in a locked box in the office above the kitchen. Old school Italian restaurateur, just like I thought." He set the drive on the kitchen table. His jacket was damp from the night air, and there was a fresh scab on his right knuckle that hadn't been there before. He noticed her looking at it. There was one of Damien's people still in the alley. He was more enthusiastic than skilled. "I'm fine." He said it without impatience. Just a statement. He's fine too. He'll have a headache and a strong incentive to reconsider his career choices. Victoria looked at the drive. "Is it all there?" Interior cameras, 3 angles, timestamp from 6:47 through 8:22. It covers the full room. Every asset Damien placed inside Marcello's tonight will be on that footage. He pulled the chair from the kitchen table and sat down, and she noticed for the first time that he was moving slightly carefully, not limping, but with the controlled economy of someone managing something they weren't going to mention. "How's your ankle?" She blinked. "What?" "When we went through the service door, you came down hard on your left foot. I heard it." He was looking at her with the same directness he applied to everything. "You've been favoring it since the alley." Victoria opened her mouth to say she was fine, then closed it again because she'd been about to say exactly what he'd said when she'd asked about his hand. "It's not bad," she said instead, which was more accurate. "Twisted, not broken." "There's an ice pack in the freezer. Use it." She got the ice pack, sat at the table across from him. The clock voices from the shop came through the wall in their layered, overlapping rhythms, and she had gotten used to them sometime during the 2.5 hours she'd spent not sleeping on his couch, so that now they were less like noise and more like a particular quality of silence. Nathan was looking at something on the workbench through the doorway, not a clock. A manila folder worn at the corners, the kind of folder that had been opened and closed many times over a period of months. "Nathan," she said, "what is that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and brought it to the table. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to hear it without deciding immediately how you feel about it." She put both hands flat on the table. "All right." He opened the folder. Inside was a collection of printed documents, handwritten notes, and photographs that Victoria recognized with the slow-building disorientation of someone encountering pieces of their own life in a context they hadn't authorized. Her building's parking structure, a street-level photograph of Sterling Capital's lobby entrance, a printout of what appeared to be a shell company registration from 18 months ago, names in Nathan's cramped shorthand connected by lines, numbers that meant something she couldn't immediately parse. She looked up at him. "How long have you had this?" 5 months. He said it directly, without apology. "Give or take." 5 months. She heard her own voice land on the words with a flatness she hadn't intended. "You've been investigating my company for 5 months." "Not your company. Something adjacent to your company." He sat down and turned the folder so it faced her, the way you turn something towards someone when you want them to look at it rather than at you. 3 months after I moved the shop here, one of my neighbors, a retired accountant named George Pulaski, 73, been on this block his whole life, came to me with something, a problem. He'd lost a significant portion of his savings through a financial advisory service that turned out to be a feeder fund. Victoria went still. Pulaski's account had been managed by a mid-tier advisory firm called Meridian Wealth Partners, Nathan continued. When the fund restructured and the money disappeared into reclassified assets, he got a letter explaining it in language that was technically accurate and deliberately incomprehensible. He brought it to me because he didn't know who else to bring it to, and because I used to help him with his clock. A pause. I looked into it as a favor. Didn't expect to find much. And you found... She was already looking at the papers, her mind running ahead of his words. Meridian Wealth Partners is managed through a holding structure that traces back to a limited partnership registered in Delaware 18 months ago. That partnership lists 2 controlling members. He turned to the relevant page. One is a numbered company with no public-facing identity. The other, he tapped the name written there in his shorthand, is Calvin Mercer. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Victoria sat with that. Let it settle through all the layers of what she already knew and what she'd suspected and what she hadn't let herself suspect. Calvin Mercer had been running a feeder scheme through a shell advisory structure, pulling money from retail investors who thought they were accessing institutional-grade returns, and that scheme had been operating for at least 18 months. 18 months ago was when he'd started pushing for the asset management spinoff at Sterling Capital. A spinoff that would have given him access to the distribution network, the client roles, the regulatory infrastructure. He hadn't wanted her company because he wanted to run it. He'd wanted it because he needed it as a vehicle. He needed Sterling's infrastructure to scale it, she said. That's what it looks like. Small-scale feeder can only run so long before the math stops working. He needed legitimate distribution capacity and a credible institutional wrapper. Nathan's voice was measured, factual. Your company would have given him both. And when I kept blocking the spinoff, he needed a different solution, Nathan finished. Victoria sat back, pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for a moment. Not dramatic, just the physical act of someone absorbing too much information in too little time and needing a second for the pressure behind her forehead to equalize. You were going to take this to the authorities, she said, before tonight happened. I was building the picture first. You don't go to federal regulators with incomplete documentation on a target who has resources. You go when you have enough that they can't dismiss it without looking negligent. He looked at the folder. I was maybe 3 weeks out. And then Daniel arranged our date. I didn't know who you were when he first called me, Nathan said. He described you as a woman who worked in finance and needed to get out of her own head for one evening. I agreed because I owe Daniel a favor and he doesn't ask for them often. A slight pause. When he told me your name, I almost called it off. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. Because I thought, if I could spend 2 hours across a table from Victoria Sterling without mentioning any of this, I could probably establish whether my read on Mercer was correct before I blew up her life with it. He said it with the particular flatness of someone who knows exactly how their reasoning sounds in retrospect. It seemed logical at the time. That is, she tried to find the right word. That is an extraordinarily strange reason to go on a blind date. In my defense, I didn't expect the evening to develop the way it did. None of us expected that. She looked at the papers again. At George Pulaski's name in the notes, her neighbor, Nathan had called him, an old man who'd spent his working life accumulating something and had it quietly hollowed out by a man in an expensive suit at a board table. The particular ordinary devastation of it sat on her chest with unexpected weight. How much did he lose? Nathan looked at her. Pulaski? About 60,000. His wife's medical fund, mostly. She had health issues. It was specifically set aside. Victoria didn't say anything. He's not the only one, Nathan said quietly. I found 7 other accounts in the same advisory structure, different amounts, same outcome. She pressed her lips together, nodded once. Okay, she said. Her voice was even. We have the footage from the restaurant. We have the call log Rachel found. We have this. She touched the folder. What we need is the connection between Damien and Calvin in a form that puts them together in the same instruction chain. That's what was missing, Nathan agreed, or was, before tonight. The call log Rachel found gets us close, but not all the way. Phone records can be explained by a sufficiently resourced defense attorney. We need something more direct. He looked at the drive on the table. I want to go back to the restaurant. Victoria stared at him. We just left the restaurant. I know, but I missed something when I was there for the drive. The private dining room on the east side, it's where Marcello's hosts closed business dinners. I've walked past it enough times to know they have a secondary audio system for speeches and presentations. He was already working through it. She could see him doing it, the same efficient running of options she'd watched him do outside the alley. Old systems like that store locally, and if Damien met with anyone at Marcello's in the last 6 weeks, which he would have because a man like Damien uses restaurants he controls, not ones he doesn't, there's a chance the audio logs are still on that system. That's a large assumption. It is. About 60% probability. You assign probability estimates to assumptions. It's useful. She looked at him for a long moment, then she stood up. I'm coming this time. He started to say something. Nathan. She said it in a particular way, not loud, not hard, but with the same quality his voice had when he issued an instruction and expected it to hold. I am the CEO of $1 billion company. I have sat across tables from people who were actively trying to destroy me and smiled while I did it. I have navigated negotiations that your entire military career would categorize as asymmetric warfare. I am not a liability on this. A beat. I am also the person most likely to recognize whether what we find is significant, because I know this company's history better than anyone alive. The silence stretched for exactly long enough. Stay behind me, he said. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Within reason. No, not within reason. Exactly. She met his eyes. Fine. Exactly. He almost said something else. Didn't. Change out of the dress? There's a sweatshirt and a pair of track pants in the closet. They're Lily's clothes bag, the ones I keep here for school pickups. They'll be large on you. The track pants were, in fact, 3 sizes too large and required the drawstring cinched to an almost architectural degree. Nathan looked at her when she came out of the bathroom and had the good judgment not to comment. They went out together through the side entrance into the thin hours of early morning, Chicago exhaling around them the particular pre-dawn breath of a city that never fully sleeps but does, at this hour, reduce itself to a quieter register. Empty streets, streetlights doing their patient yellow work, the lake wind cutting through everything. Victoria had not been outside at 3 a.m, and she couldn't remember how long. Her entire adult life had been scheduled and structured and protected to a degree she was only now, walking through the specific dark of a Pilsen side street beside a man who checked alley mouths without appearing to. Beginning to understand had isolated her from something real and ordinary about how the world moved. She didn't say any of that out loud. They covered the distance to the restaurant in 19 minutes, moving at Nathan's pace, which was the pace of people who belonged where they were going. The police tape was still up at the front entrance, but the cruisers were gone. A single incident report filed, scene released, the kind of abbreviated official response that happens when armed men flee the scene, and the restaurant owner is more interested in liability than investigation. Nathan took them around to the loading dock on the building's north side. A metal staircase, outdoor, attached to the brick face like an afterthought. He went up it without sound, moving near the wall where the structure was most solid, and she followed, keeping her footfalls where his had been. The service entrance on the second floor was not locked, which Nathan had apparently anticipated because he didn't pause at it. Inside was a corridor that ran the length of the building's upper floor, staff lockers on one side, a break room, the back end of the owner's office where Nathan had retrieved the drive earlier. The private dining room was at the far end. Nathan put his hand on the door and looked at her. She nodded. He opened it. The room was dark and smelled of extinguished candles and the particular close atmosphere of a space that had been recently occupied. A long table set for 8, the settings undisturbed. This room hadn't been used tonight, which meant the chaos in the restaurant below hadn't reached it. At the far end of the room, mounted discreetly in the corner above a small credenza, was the audio interface panel Nathan had described. Small, black, the kind of commercial-grade system that a high-end restaurant would install for presentations and speeches, and that the owner's nephew who set it up 10 years ago would have configured with the factory defaults. Because that was the kind of thing that happened with technology installed by people who weren't entirely sure how it worked. Nathan crossed to it, opened the panel cover, found what he was looking for in under 40 seconds, a compact flash storage card slotted into a reader port, recording over itself on a rolling 30-day cycle. He removed it carefully. 60%, Victoria said quietly. 63, he said, which wasn't a joke. He pocketed the card. They were back through the service door in under 2 minutes. On the staircase going down, Nathan stopped suddenly, one hand out, not touching her but placing itself in her path in the gesture she already understood meant stop and don't speak. She stopped. He was looking at something in the alley below. She followed his sight line. 2 men standing near the loading dock, not moving, not speaking. The particular stillness of people who were waiting for something rather than doing something. Nathan looked at the staircase, at the alley, at the gap between the building and the adjacent parking structure. He pointed to the parking structure gap, then held up 3 fingers, then pointed at her, then pointed at the gap. 3 seconds. Go. She looked at the gap. It was narrow, maybe 2.5 feet. 1 story down from the staircase landing to the sloped roof of a dumpster shelter, then to the ground. She looked back at Nathan. He held up 3 fingers again. She went. She wasn't graceful about it. She caught her hip on the railing edge going over and landed on the dumpster shelter with a noise that was louder than she'd have liked and half slid, half dropped to the alley floor on the far side of it. Her ankle protested the landing with a sharp opinion that she absorbed and set aside. She pressed herself against the parking structure wall and waited. From the other side of the dumpster shelter, she heard movement, fast and controlled, and then the brief compressed sound of something physical and then quiet. Nathan's footsteps landed beside her 11 seconds later. Clear, he said. Are they? Unconscious and secured. They'll wake up in about 20 minutes. He looked at her hip. You're bleeding. It's minor. She looked at her own hand, a shallow scrape along her right palm from the dumpster shelter edge. I've had worse. In what context? I grew up with 2 older brothers, she said. Believe me, I've had worse. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but in the vicinity. The specific expression of someone who has received unexpectedly useful information and is reassessing accordingly. They moved away from the restaurant at a steady walk, back into the surrounding streets, and Nathan called Rachel from the burner phone when they were 3 blocks clear. Rachel picked up on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. Tell me what you have, Nathan said without preamble. A pause on Rachel's end, then, the call log I pulled. I cross-referenced it. The number that called Damien this morning at 5:47 a.m. is registered to a property management company in Evanston, which is a shell, which I traced to a second holding company. A breath. The second company shares a registered agent with Mercer Strategic Holdings. Nathan was quiet for 2 seconds. You're sure? I'm a forensic accounting minor who got bored and went to law school instead. Yes, I'm sure. The voice of someone who had been very frightened and had converted that fright into the kind of focused, precise work that fear sometimes enables when you're built a particular way. There's more. I pulled the board's proxy voting documentation from the secure server. Calvin filed an emergency competency petition 2 weeks ago. It's sealed. It was never supposed to come to the full board, but I have access to the seal log, and it's there, filed and dated. Victoria, walking beside Nathan, had heard enough of Rachel's voice through the phone to catch the shape of it. "What does that mean?" she said quietly. Nathan relayed it without lowering the phone. "Mercer filed a competency petition against you 2 weeks ago. Sealed. It would allow the board to vote on your fitness to serve as CEO without your presence if I was missing," Victoria said, "or declared incompetent." The arithmetic of it finished itself cleanly and horribly in her mind. That's why they needed me gone. Not just for the vote, a simple majority vote I could challenge, but a sealed competency petition with a board quorum, that has teeth. That takes time to fight. "Rachel," Nathan said into the phone, "can you get a copy of that petition to us?" "Already done. I emailed it to a draft folder in an account that only Victoria will recognize. The account name is your mother's dog's name," she added, directing the last part clearly toward Victoria through the phone. Victoria almost laughed. "Biscotti," she said. "She named her dog Biscotti." "Your mother loves that dog," Rachel said, and the familiar specificity of it, the small, ordinary, true thing dropped into the middle of all of this, landed in Victoria's chest with a force she hadn't anticipated. She pressed her free hand against the front of the borrowed sweatshirt. "Rachel," she said, moving closer to Nathan so she could speak near the phone. "Are you safe? My sister's apartment is above a karate studio, and my brother-in-law is a paramedic who has trust issues with strangers. Yes, I'm safe." A pause. "Victoria, how bad is it?" Victoria thought about the honest answer, about the folder on Nathan's kitchen table, about George Pulaski's $60,000 specifically set aside, systematically extracted, about Calvin Mercer sitting in boardrooms for 8 months discussing restructures and efficiency and shareholder value while building a machine that was designed to eat the people who trusted it, about Damian Holt, who had driven her to quarterly earnings calls and stood outside hotel conference rooms at international forums and carried an umbrella when rain was forecast because she hated being caught without one, and who had been on a different payroll for she didn't know how long. "It's bad," she said, "but I think we have what we need." "Good." Rachel's voice steadied into something businesslike. "Then let me tell you the part I saved. The board meeting tomorrow, Calvin's office called this morning. They moved the start time. Instead of 10 a.m., it's been rescheduled to 7 a.m. Nathan and Victoria looked at each other. "He panicked," Nathan said. "When the extraction failed, he moved the timeline forward." "How much time do we have?" Victoria said. Nathan checked his watch. It was 3:41 in the morning. "A little over 3 hours," he said. Victoria absorbed that. 3 hours to turn a flashcard, a surveillance drive, a call log, a sealed petition, and a 5-month-old investigation into something she could walk into a boardroom with. 3 hours of night left before the vote that Calvin had been engineering for 8 months. The vote that Damian had sent armed men into a restaurant to guarantee. The city was still dark around them. The lake wind had picked up. Nathan's jacket was damp at the collar, and he hadn't mentioned being cold once, which she suspected was less about tolerance and more about the same mechanism that kept his voice level when everything was burning. The deliberate management of discomfort into irrelevance. "We need a printer," she said. "Shop has one. We need Rachel to send us everything she has to a secure access point. Library computer pre-dawn 3 blocks from here. I have a card. 3 tab. We need to compile this into something that a boardroom of lawyers can't reflexively dismiss in the first 30 seconds. That's your job," he said. "You know how those rooms work better than I do." She did. She knew exactly how those rooms worked, the specific grammar of corporate power, the sequencing of evidence presentation, the crucial importance of hitting the right beat before the other side can establish a counter-narrative. She'd been in enough of those rooms to know that walking in with the truth was necessary, but not sufficient. You had to walk in with the truth arranged in a way that left no comfortable alternative interpretation. She started organizing it in her head as they walked. The surveillance footage established Damian's assets in the restaurant. The call log connected Damian to Calvin's structure. The flashcard, pending what it held, potentially put their voices in the same room. Rachel's petition documentation showed premeditation at the board level, and Nathan's folder on Calvin's feeder scheme gave the motive a shape and a history that predated everything else. It was enough. If they moved fast and got it formatted correctly, it was enough. Nathan, she said. Yeah. When this is over, she stopped. When this is over, I'm going to need to tell someone about George Pulaski. He looked at her sideways as they walked. I know. I want to make sure he's part of whatever comes next, not just collateral information. I know, he said again, differently this time. They walked the last block back to the shop in a silence that was not empty but full of the thing they weren't saying yet about the next 3 hours, and what they had to build, and what it would cost, and whether it would be enough. The clock voices found them again as Nathan opened the side door, that many-layered ticking coming through the walls in its patient, indifferent chorus, keeping the time it had been assigned to keep without reference to what any particular human being needed the hour to be. Victoria sat down at Nathan's workbench, the same bench where he straightened gears and cleaned mainsprings and put broken things back into the condition they were meant to be in, and opened the manila folder and spread its contents alongside the drive and the flashcard and the notes she was already compiling from memory, and began to build the case. Nathan made coffee. It was bad coffee, the kind that comes from a machine that has never been descaled and probably never will be. And he handed her a mug without asking how she took it, and she drank it without remarking on the quality. And that small, ordinary exchange, two people in the before-dawn hours of a very long night drinking bad coffee over something that mattered, was in its own way the most normal thing that had happened since 7:14 the previous evening. Outside, somewhere above the city's ambient noise, the first birds had started up, tentative and dispersed, the earliest of them, the ones that didn't wait for light. 3 hours. They worked. The flashcard held 31 days of audio. Nathan ran it through the shop's laptop at 4 in the morning while Victoria organized the printed documentation into the sequence she'd determined would hit hardest in the first 4 minutes of a board presentation. Because 4 minutes was what she had before someone with a law degree and a vested interest in the outcome would find procedural grounds to interrupt. She knew that room. She knew the specific choreography of how power protects itself when it feels threatened, and she was building something that moved faster than that reflex. Nathan worked through the audio files with headphones, scanning timestamps, moving fast. He was looking for Damien's voice specifically, a voice he'd heard enough of in the last several hours through Rachel's account and Victoria's descriptions to have a working impression of. Lower register, clipped, the voice of a man who had learned to communicate in the abbreviated style of people who consider their time more valuable than full sentences. He found it at the 41-minute mark of a recording dated 19 days prior. He pulled off the headphones and handed them to Victoria without saying anything. She listened. The recording quality was imperfect. The audio system in Marcello's private dining room had been installed for speeches and presentations, not surveillance, and the ambient noise of the restaurant occasionally swelled and partially obscured the conversation. But the voices were distinct, and the content was not ambiguous to anyone who knew the context. Damien's voice, clipped and precise. Another voice, older, deliberate, with the particular cadence of a man who had spent decades choosing his words in rooms full of people who were listening carefully. Calvin Mercer. The timing has to be exact. If she's present for the opening motion, the petition is moot. She won't be present. I've handled the schedule. And the vote count? Ferris and Huang are confirmed. That's enough for quorum on the petition. Once she's removed from the voting record, the restructure motion passes on the existing proxies. What about the board members who are loyal to her? A pause. Loyalty is a professional position. Professional positions change when the professional environment changes. Victoria took the headphones off. She sat very still for a moment. Nathan watched her without speaking, because there was nothing to say that the recording hadn't already said more directly, and because he had learned a long time ago that there were moments when the right thing was simply to be present and quiet and not fill the space with something that felt like comfort, but was actually just discomfort management. That's Damien, she said. Yes. I've known him for 3 years. She set the headphones on the workbench. He drove me home when I had the flu and couldn't keep a cab. He remembered my mother's birthday. A pause that had something old in it. Not new grief, but old. The kind that comes from discovering that a thing you believed was real was instead a construction someone else had made and maintained for their own purposes. He was very good at it. He was, Nathan said. That's not something you should have seen through. Don't, she said quietly. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm saying that men like that are designed not to be seen through. It's not a failure of yours. It's a feature of his. She looked at him. Then she picked up the headphones again, listened to another 30 seconds of the recording, and handed them back. Copy it twice, she said. Different formats. Already on it. They worked for another 90 minutes. The bad coffee ran out and neither of them mentioned it. At some point, Victoria took off Nathan's oversized shoes and sat cross-legged on the workbench stool in her socked feet, a legal pad propped on her knee, writing in the precise shorthand of someone who had spent years condensing complex financial arguments into the minimum number of words needed to make them irrefutable. Nathan came and went, copying files, printing documents at the library 2 blocks away using his card, returning with pages still warm from the machine. At 5:47, he sat down on the other stool and ate a granola bar from a box on the shelf above the bench. The board members, he said. The ones not in Calvin's pocket. How many? Victoria was counting in her head. Definitively on my side, 3. Possibly 4. Margaret Chen will follow the evidence wherever it goes. She's been on the board since before my father died, and she has zero tolerance for procedural manipulation. She looked up. The others are complicated. Some of them genuinely believe Calvin's restructure is good strategy. They're not corrupt. They're just wrong. Those are the ones you need. I know how to talk to them. She said it without arrogance, more like someone identifying a skill the way Nathan would identify a tool on his bench, knowing its use and its limits. I've been in rooms with them for 7 years. I know what they respond to. You'll have maybe 90 seconds before Calvin tries to reframe. 60, she said. He's faster than that. She made a note on the legal pad. What I need is to control the first question. If I control the first question, I control the direction of the next 10 minutes, and 10 minutes is enough. And what's the first question? She looked at him steadily. Why is the man who organized last night's kidnapping sitting at this table? Nathan was quiet for a second. That's a good first question. I thought so. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, not sunrise yet, but the cautious preliminary brightening that precedes it, the gray before the gold. Nathan noticed it through the shop's small east-facing window and noted the time. 6:12. We need to move, he said. I know. Victoria uncrossed her legs and stood, and Nathan saw the wince she absorbed quickly when her left ankle took her weight. She'd taped it herself earlier with the first aid kit, tight and functional, and she hadn't mentioned it again. I need to change. I don't have anything that... I have a change of clothes in the emergency bag I keep in my office. Rachel can get them to me. She was already reaching for the burner phone. My building has a staff entrance on the south side that Damien doesn't control. It goes to facilities maintenance, separate keycard system, separate access log. She dialed. He may not know it exists. Rachel picked up in 2 rings. The conversation was brief and precise. Rachel had the emergency bag. She kept a copy of Victoria's office key for exactly this category of situation, which said something useful about Rachel Brooks that Nathan filed away. She would meet them at the staff entrance in 30 minutes. She'd also, on her own initiative, contacted Sterling Capital's outside legal counsel, a woman named Patricia Voss at a firm with no connection to Calvin Mercer, and given her a summary of the situation. Patricia Voss was, as of 90 minutes ago, aware that her client might need immediate legal representation at an emergency board meeting. She was already in transit. Nathan listened to Victoria relay all of this and thought about the machine a woman like that had built around herself. Not perfect, not impenetrable, clearly not impenetrable, but built with the kind of deliberate redundancy that came from understanding that individual people failed and systems needed backup systems. Rachel Brooks was a backup system. Patricia Voss was a backup system. The emergency bag in a locked office was a backup system. Nathan Cross had also, in his former life, been a backup system. He understood the architecture of it. Your lawyer, he said when Victoria hung up. Does she know about me? I told Rachel you exist and that you helped. Rachel told Patricia there was a civilian involved who has relevant evidence. She looked at him. Patricia's question was whether you had a criminal record. No. I told her probably not. A slight pause. She said probably not was sufficient for her purposes this morning. They left the shop at 6:22. Nathan locked it with the same 3-bolt sequence, then paused at the door with his hand still on the lock. Lily's going to wake up at Mrs. Kowalski's at 7, he said. He said it in a particular way, not to Victoria specifically, more like thinking aloud, which she was beginning to understand he did occasionally when the information was relevant but not actionable. She'll want breakfast. Mrs. Kowalski will make her oatmeal, which Lily will negotiate into oatmeal with chocolate chips, which Mrs. Kowalski will agree to because she always does. Victoria looked at him. She's fine. I know. He took his hand off the lock. I know she is. They walked. The city was in its early morning register now. Delivery trucks, a few commuters, coffee shops with their lights on and their doors just opening. The particular quality of a city getting ready rather than a city already running. Nathan carried the documents in a sealed envelope from the shop's supply drawer. Victoria walked beside him in the oversized sweatshirt and the taped ankle legal pad under her arm, and if either of them looked like what they actually were, two people who had not slept and had been through a significant amount in the preceding 11 hours, neither of them was operating like it. Rachel was at the south entrance when they arrived, exactly where she said she'd be, holding a garment bag and a tote with the efficient readiness of a woman who had spent 4 years being useful under pressure. She was small and quick-eyed, and when she saw Victoria, she crossed the distance fast and grabbed her by the arm in a way that was professional for the first half-second and then clearly wasn't. You scared the hell out of me, Rachel said. I know, I'm sorry. Victoria put her hand over Rachel's briefly. I'm okay. We're okay. Rachel looked at Nathan over Victoria's shoulder with an expression that was actively assessing him from all angles simultaneously. You're the clock repairman. That's been the prevailing description, yes. Rachel said you fought off 6 people with... Rachel stopped. I don't think she knew what you used. Whatever was available, Nathan said. Rachel continued looking at him for another 2 seconds, then appeared to make a decision about him and moved on in the way of people who make decisions quickly and stick with them. Patricia is in the lobby. Calvin's people are already upstairs. He got here at 5:45, which means he panicked and overcorrected. Damien is with him. 3 other men I don't recognize are in the hall outside the boardroom. Board members? Victoria said, moving toward the door. Chen is here. Reyes and Nakamura just arrived. Ferris and Huang came with Calvin. Rachel kept pace. Abbott and Torres aren't here yet. Abbott will follow Chen. Torres is the one I need to talk to before we go in. He's in the lobby coffee area. He looked uncomfortable. He should be. He knows something is wrong and he doesn't know which way to move. Victoria pushed through the staff entrance door. That's actually useful. The building's interior was the particular clean anonymity of a place that held significant amounts of money and had been designed to look like it deserved to. They moved through the maintenance corridor to the staff elevators. Victoria changed in the elevator, one of those fast, practical, quick changes that required the garment bag and Rachel's help, and Nathan looking at the elevator ceiling with the expression of a man who has more pressing things to consider than the current situation. She emerged on the lobby level in a dark charcoal suit and heels that were hers, her own shoes, her own ground, back in the clothes that were her working armor after a night in someone else's too large jacket and a borrowed tracksuit, and something in her posture recalibrated, not into a different person, into a fuller version of the same one. Nathan noticed it, didn't say anything about it. Patricia Voss was a compact woman in her late 50s with silver hair and the unhurried eyes of someone who had seen a great many corporate emergencies and had stopped finding them surprising decades ago. She shook Victoria's hand once, looked at Nathan with the brief professional assessment she'd apparently already started remotely, and said, "Walk me through the chain of evidence in order of legal weight. You have..." She checked her watch, 9 minutes before they're likely to open the meeting. They walked and talked. Nathan laid it out. The surveillance footage, the call log, the audio recording, the petition documentation, the shell company research. Patricia listened without interrupting, asking two sharp questions that cut to the precise joints of the evidentiary chain, and then said, "The audio is circumstantial without corroboration, but the call log plus the surveillance footage plus the petition creates enough predicate for a federal referral. That's what we're going for today. Not a verdict. A referral that makes proceeding with the vote legally untenable." "And the competency petition?" Victoria said. "Withdrawn the moment we present the documentation that it was filed in coordination with the party who organized a kidnapping attempt. Any attorney in that room who values their license will advise Calvin to drop it within 60 seconds of seeing what you have." Patricia looked at the envelope Nathan was carrying. "Is all of it in there?" "Plus copies," Nathan said. 3 separate formats." Patricia looked at him with the same expression Rachel had used, the short, complete assessment. "What's your background?" "Navy, Special Operations." "Do you have any legal exposure from last night?" Self-defense is well documented in the restaurant footage. The 2 men in the alley were Damien's people conducting surveillance on a building they had no right to be surveilling. The 2 at the loading dock, same category. He paused. "I was careful." "He was careful," Victoria confirmed. Patricia absorbed this. "Fine. You come in with us, but you don't speak unless I indicate. Victoria presents, Rachel handles the documentation display, I manage the legal challenges." She looked at Victoria. "Torres?" "I have 2 minutes with him before we go up." "Make it 90 seconds." Torres was at the coffee station exactly where Rachel had said he'd be. A tall man in his mid-50s with the look of someone who had been a genuinely good board member for a genuinely good company and was now standing in an elevator that he could feel descending without knowing what floor the floor was. He saw Victoria and his face did something complicated. "You're here," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Edward, look at me." He did. "Whatever Calvin told you about last night, whatever version you received, I need you to suspend it for the next 20 minutes and look at what I'm going to put in front of the board." "Victoria, there are people saying you—" "I know what they're saying. I need 20 minutes and your willingness to look at evidence." She said it without heat, without urgency in her voice, just level and direct and specific. "You've been on this board for 5 years. Have I ever asked you for anything that wasn't in the company's interest?" Torres looked at her for a moment. At the envelope in Nathan's hand, at Rachel standing 2 steps behind Victoria with the posture of someone ready to produce documents on command. 20 minutes, he said. The elevator up was silent. Nathan stood at the back of the group, watching the floor numbers change, running a final tactical accounting, not of the boardroom situation, which was Victoria's territory and Patricia's, but of the physical space they were about to enter and the people in it who were not board members. 3 men in the hall that Rachel had identified as unknown. Damien Holt and Calvin Mercer, who was not a physical threat but whose reaction to seeing Victoria walk through that door was going to be fast and probably loud, and loud reactions in rooms with frightened people sometimes escalated into things that required a different kind of management. The elevator opened on the executive floor. The hall outside the boardroom had the specific atmosphere of a room adjacent to something tense. Lower voices than normal. People standing slightly too close to walls. The body language of people who were waiting for something without wanting to appear to be waiting. The 3 men Rachel had flagged were positioned at intervals that Nathan clocked immediately as coverage positioning, the same arrangement as the assets in Marcello's the night before, the same operational signature. Damien Holt was standing near the boardroom door. He saw Victoria at the same moment she saw him. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Victoria walked toward the boardroom door with the particular forward momentum of someone who has decided that the space between where they are and where they need to be does not contain anything that has the right to stop them. And Damien took 1 step sideways to block her path, and Nathan was already moving. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He simply placed himself between Damien and Victoria with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this particular thing, creating a physical fact between a threat and a person. Enough times that it required no excess motion. Damien looked at Nathan for the first time since the previous night. Something shifted in Damien's expression, the recognition of what he was looking at, the rapid reassessment, the recalculation of the odds. He was a man who had spent years in the security profession, and he understood immediately that the thing in front of him was not an obstacle in the ordinary sense. "Step aside," Damien said. His voice was controlled, but carrying something underneath it that control was just barely managing. "No," Nathan said, simply and completely. "You have no standing here. You organized a kidnapping in a public restaurant last night using a minimum of 7 assets. You've been on a secondary payroll while serving as head of security for this company. You have 3 men deployed in this hallway right now in a coverage formation that I've been looking at since the elevator opened." Nathan's voice was exactly the same as it had been in Marcello's. Flat, specific, unhurried. The voice of someone reporting facts rather than making threats. "You don't want to do the next thing you're thinking about doing." Damien's jaw tightened. The boardroom door opened from inside. Margaret Chen, older, with the look of a woman who had spent decades watching people try to do foolish things in professional settings and had developed a very efficient impatience with it. She looked at the hall, at Damien, at Nathan, at Victoria. "Victoria," she said, "come in." They went in. The boardroom held 11 people, 9 of them seated around the long table and 2 standing near the windows at the far end. Calvin Mercer was at the head of the table where Victoria's chair was. And when the door opened and he turned and saw her, his face did the thing that faces do when they have prepared for one version of a situation and been handed a completely different one. He recovered fast. Nathan gave him that. Victoria. Warm, concerned. The specific warmth of a man performing relief. "We've been worried sick. When we heard about the incident last night, are you all right? We didn't know if you were—" "Sit down, Calvin," Victoria said. The room went quiet in a specific way. Not the quiet of people who had stopped speaking, but the quiet of people who had stopped breathing. Calvin's performed warmth adjusted itself slightly. "This is a board meeting. I'd ask that we keep to—" "Patricia." Victoria held out her hand without looking back. Patricia placed the first document set into it. Victoria set it on the table in front of Margaret Chen, who picked it up immediately and began reading with the focused attention of someone who reads documents for a living and does not do it slowly. "At approximately 7:43 last night," Victoria said, 6 armed individuals entered Marcello's fine dining and attempted to take me by force. They were not attempting to kill me. They were attempting to keep me away from this room." She set the second document set at the center of the table. "I have surveillance footage from the restaurant establishing that assets connected to our head of security were positioned inside the building before I arrived. I have call log documentation establishing communication between Damien Holt and a holding company connected to a member of this board." She looked at Calvin. "I have an audio recording of that conversation." The room was completely still. Calvin's attorney, a man Nathan didn't know, seated to Calvin's right with a leather portfolio, began to say something. Patricia cut across him in the precise, clean way of someone who has been cutting across opposing counsel for 30 years. "Any evidentiary challenges to the documentation are noted and will be addressed in the appropriate form. What we are establishing right now is factual predicate sufficient to warrant the suspension of any pending motions and the immediate referral of this matter to federal oversight. This is—" Calvin's voice had lost its performed warmth. It had found something harder underneath. "This is a disruption tactic. Victoria was involved in an incident last night that raises serious questions about her." "The competency petition you filed 2 weeks ago," Victoria said. "Sealed, dated, filed while you were coordinating with Damien Holt regarding last night's operation." She set the third document in front of Margaret Chen. "We have the filing. We have the seal log. We have the timeline." Calvin's attorney put his hand on Calvin's arm. Calvin shook it off. He was looking at Victoria with something that had dropped all its professional layering, just the bare thing underneath, which was the look of a man watching his plan come apart in real time and not yet accepting that it was happening. "You can't prove. Play it," Victoria said. Rachel had the laptop open. The audio from the flashcard came through the room's presentation speakers. Not clean, not studio quality, with the ambient sounds of a restaurant in the background, but clear enough. Damien's voice. Calvin's voice. "The timing has to be exact. If she's present for the opening motion, the petition is moot. She won't be present. I've handled the schedule." The room stayed still through it. When it ended, the only sound for a moment was the HVAC system, and somewhere far below, the sound of the city. Mercer stood up. It was not a controlled gesture. It was the standing up of a man whose body had made a decision that his brain was slightly behind on, and in the space between decision and thought, he moved toward Victoria with the specific forward momentum of someone who had run out of other options and was operating on something more primitive. Nathan was already between them. He didn't wait for Mercer to reach a threshold. He moved when Mercer stood, crossing the distance in 4 steps, placing himself in the path. And when Mercer kept coming, Nathan took his arm at the wrist and elbow with the controlled precision of someone who knew exactly how much force was needed to stop a man's forward movement without damaging anything that wouldn't heal. Mercer's momentum reversed. He went to one knee with the table edge stopping him, gasping at the pressure on his arm, which Nathan maintained for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be unambiguous, and then released. Damien had come through the boardroom door. He had his hand behind his back. Nathan turned from Mercer and looked at Damien and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the situation hadn't already said. Damien read it. His hand came out from behind his back empty. His jaw worked once. "Federal agents are in the building," Patricia said from behind Nathan, without any particular inflection, the way you state facts that are simply true. "They've been briefed. They've been here for the last 12 minutes. She looked at Damien. "The men in the hallway have already been detained." Damien looked at the door, at Nathan, at Victoria. He sat down on the floor. The specific sitting down of someone whose body has made a different kind of decision than Mercer's. The one that calculates and arrives at the conclusion that the calculation is over. 2 federal agents came through the boardroom door 30 seconds later, which was not 12 minutes, but Patricia Voss had a particular relationship with precision that was contextually flexible, and Nathan found he didn't object to it. The board watched Calvin Mercer and Damien Holt leave the room with federal agents. Not in handcuffs, not yet. That particular formality would come later and elsewhere, with the specific stunned attention of people who had come to a business meeting and were now witnesses to something that none of them would entirely know how to account for in their calendar notes. Margaret Chen set down the document she'd been reading and looked at Victoria. "Motion to table all pending agenda items pending legal review," she said, with the brisk economy of a woman who had been running board meetings since before some of the people in this room were in college. "Seconded," Torres said immediately. It passed unanimously. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her room, the room she'd been building toward for 8 months of her life being used as a mechanism against her. And she looked, Nathan thought from where he stood near the door, like someone who was holding a great deal of weight with the particular straightness of a person who does not intend to drop it. She looked back at him once. He was already moving toward the door. Not away, just to the side, out of the frame, back into the peripheral space he'd been operating in since the whole evening had begun. Not because the situation required it, but because it was where he was comfortable, and because the room she was standing in was hers, and the people in it were hers to address, and he was, whatever he was, not a part of that furniture. The federal agents were in the hall with Calvin and Damien. One of them, a woman in a dark suit, stopped Nathan as he stepped out. "Nathan Cross?" "Yes." "We'll need a statement." "I know." He glanced back through the still open boardroom door. Victoria was speaking to Margaret Chen. Rachel was beside her, producing documents with the efficiency of someone who has been preparing for this particular moment since 4 in the morning. "I have time." He stood in the hall and gave his statement to the federal agent in the precise, sequenced way he used to give mission reports. Not embellished, not minimized, just the facts in the order they occurred. The agent took notes and asked the kind of questions that told Nathan she was good at her job. He answered all of them. When he was done, he sat in a chair against the hall wall and waited, because there were still things to do that required his presence, and he wasn't the kind of person who left before a thing was finished. Through the boardroom door, he could hear Victoria's voice. Not the words, just the cadence of it. The steady, clear cadence of someone who knew what they were doing and why they were there and was not, in this moment, operating from fear. He thought about Lily waking up at Mrs. Kowalski's apartment, about oatmeal, about the particular negotiation over chocolate chips that he knew was happening right now somewhere across the city in a warm kitchen that smelled like coffee and had a cat named Gerald who refused to acknowledge anyone under the age of 40. He rubbed his face with both hands, checked his watch, looked at the wall. The city moved outside the building's glass skin, enormous and indifferent, and going about its Wednesday with full ignorance of the particular thing that had just concluded on the 14th floor. Nathan Cross sat in a plastic chair in a corporate hallway and waited for the world to catch up with what had already happened. The way he had always waited, without drama, without announcement, ready to move. The moment moving was what was needed. The federal charges were filed on a Thursday. Nathan read about it the way he read most things that concerned him, but that he had no further role in, on his phone, at the workbench, in the 20 minutes between finishing a mainspring replacement on a 1940s Elgin pocket watch and starting on the carriage clock that had been waiting in the queue for 2 weeks. The article was thorough and used the word alleged with the frequency required by legal convention, and between those allegations, the shape of what Calvin Mercer and Damian Holt had built together was rendered in the particular flat language of federal indictments, which managed to make even serious human wrongdoing sound administrative. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, securities fraud, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and attached to Calvin Mercer specifically, a separate civil referral relating to the Meridian Wealth Partners structure and the investors whose money had been reclassified into non-existence. George Pulaski was not named in the article. None of the individual investors were. But Nathan had called him the morning after the boardroom, called him from the shop landline, because Pulaski didn't entirely trust cell phones either, which was one of the things Nathan had always liked about him, and told him what had happened, and told him that his situation was now part of a federal investigation, and that there were attorneys who would be in touch. Pulaski had been quiet for a long moment. Then he'd said, "You did that?" "I had help," Nathan said. "Your date?" "Among others." Another pause. "She's the billionaire one. From the news." "She is." "Huh," Pulaski said. And then, in the voice of a man who has learned over 7 decades not to waste energy on being surprised by the way things turn out. "Your clock's ready, by the way. The mantle one. I fixed the pendulum myself." "George, I told you not to." "It was loose. I tightened it. Don't make a thing of it." Nathan set his phone down and went back to the Elgin. The weeks that followed had a particular quality that he recognized from other endings of other things. The strange decompression of a situation that had been at high pressure and then wasn't anymore, and the way ordinary life reasserted itself into the space left behind. He took Lily to school. He repaired clocks. He ate dinner at the table in the back apartment with his daughter, who was working through a phase of asking extremely specific questions about how things worked, not just clocks, but everything. How did bridges stay up? Why did the refrigerator make noise? What was the moon made of? And he answered them as honestly and completely as he could, which was the one area of his life where he felt most reliably competent. Lily knew something had happened. She was 7, not oblivious, and she had come home from Mrs. Kowalski's that Wednesday morning to find her father looking like a man who had been awake for a long time and had recently been in a situation. She'd looked at him with the particular focused attention that children bring to the faces of adults they depend on, checking for the specific things that children check for without being able to name what they're checking for. "Are you okay?" she'd asked. "I'm fine," he said. "Come here." He'd hugged her for longer than usual, which she'd allowed with the gracious patience of a 7-year-old who understands that adults sometimes need things they can't explain. "Did something happen?" she said into his shoulder. "Something happened," he confirmed. "But it's over and everybody's okay." She pulled back and looked at him, looked at the cut above his eye, which had healed to a thin, dark line. "Did you fall?" "Sort of," he said. She accepted this with the pragmatic flexibility of a child who has learned that adult explanations sometimes come in compressed form and can be revisited later. "Mrs. Kowalski let me put chocolate chips in my oatmeal," she said. "I heard. She said I could have them in my oatmeal every time." She did not say that. She strongly implied it. Nathan looked at his daughter, her mother's eyes, his own stubbornness, the combination of the two of them that she'd assembled into something entirely her own, and felt the specific exhausted tenderness that follows a night of not being sure you'd make it back, and the specific relief that comes with walking through your own door and finding the small particular world you built still intact and waiting. Oatmeal with chocolate chips is a weekend thing, he said. Wednesday is practically the weekend. It's really not. It's the middle of the week, which means it's equidistant from both weekends. He stared at her. Where did you learn the word equidistant? Mrs. Kowalski was watching a geography program. He made her oatmeal without chocolate chips, and she ate it without complaining, which was its own form of grace. The first time Victoria came to the shop after everything, it was on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks after the boardroom. Not the day of the federal filing, not the day the news cycle had found Nathan's name, buried in the 5th paragraph of the initial coverage, described as a private individual who provided material assistance, which was exactly the level of description he preferred. But 3 weeks later, when the story had moved from breaking to ongoing to the kind of background legal process that would run for months before it reached any resolution. He heard the bell above the front door and came out from the back, expecting a customer who'd called about a grandfather clock, and found Victoria Sterling standing in the middle of his shop in a coat he didn't recognize, looking at the clocks in the window with her hands in her pockets. She looked different than she had at the board meeting, less armored, not soft. Victoria Sterling was not a person who moved through the world softly, but without the specific tightness that came from operating under sustained threat. She looked, he thought, like someone who had slept recently and regularly, which was its own kind of different. The window display, she said, without turning around. You change it. Every 2 weeks, keeps people looking. The one on the left is new. She was looking at a small carriage clock in burgundy enamel with brass feet. Is that French? Japy Frères, around 1890. Someone brought it in 6 months ago, thinking it was broken. It just needed cleaning. She turned, looked at him in the way she had of looking at things, fully, without the social habit of glancing away. You're not surprised I'm here. I figured you'd come eventually. He moved behind the counter, not because he needed to be there, but because the counter gave the conversation a shape, a slight formality that felt appropriate for a first time after everything. How's the company? Complicated, she said. Better than it was. Margaret Chen has been steadying. She's been on boards for 40 years, and she has a very low tolerance for drama, which is useful right now because there's a lot of it. She came to the counter and looked at the Elgin he'd been working on, the components laid out on the felt pad. Rachel is managing the restructure communication. She's better at it than most of the people I've hired specifically for that role. She's good, Nathan agreed. She asked me to thank you, by the way. The specific thing she said was... Victoria paused, appearing to retrieve the exact phrasing. Tell the clock guy I said he's okay. Nathan almost smiled. High praise. From Rachel it is. Victoria looked around the shop again, at the clocks, at the workbench, at the shelf of small drawers with their handwritten labels, at the crayon drawing visible through the open door to the back. How's Lily? Campaigning aggressively for a dog, currently at 4 consecutive days of sustained argument, which is a personal record for her. Are you going to get one? I'm holding out for a compromise. Maybe a fish. She's 7. She'll eat you alive on the negotiation. I know. I'm hoping she burns herself out before I have to formally concede. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking at the carriage clock in the window again. Nathan waited because he had learned in the past 3 weeks, through a careful accounting of everything that had happened and his own honest assessment of what he felt about it, that patience with this particular woman was both necessary and, as it turned out, not difficult to maintain. I want to commission something, she said. He waited. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a small object wrapped in a soft cloth. She set it on the counter and unfolded the cloth carefully, with the specific care of someone handling something that matters. It was a pocket watch. Gold case, worn at the edges with the wear of decades of being handled by someone who carried it daily. The crystal was cracked, and the hands had stopped at 723, and the case was engraved on the back with initials that Nathan read upside down without meaning to, R.S. My father's, Victoria said. He carried it every day until he died. It stopped the year I started the company. She looked at it. I've had it in a box for 7 years. I keep meaning to do something with it, and then not knowing what. Nathan picked it up carefully, opened the case. The movement inside was a manual wind, mid-century Swiss manufacture, quality piece for its era. The damage was to the escapement, repairable, not catastrophic, the kind of repair that required patience and a steady hand and the particular attention that he gave to things he considered worth restoring. "I can fix this," he said. "I know you can." She paused. "I looked you up, actually, before Daniel arranged the dinner. I'd already looked up Nathan Cross of Pilsen before I walked into Marcello's." He looked up from the watch. "Why?" "Because I don't go to dinners blind. I'm not built that way." A slight pause. "You had a review on a watchmaker's forum from a woman who said you restored her grandmother's wristwatch to better than original condition and then refused to charge her because it turned out the watch had been her grandmother's mother's before that. And you decided—" She stopped, appeared to be quoting from memory. "You decided some things earn their restoration for free." Nathan set the pocket watch down on the felt pad. He didn't say anything. "I thought that was—" She searched for the word. "I thought that was either very good marketing or it was just the truth. And I went to dinner to find out which one." "And?" "And then armed men came through the front door and I didn't get to decide before the evening got complicated." She looked at him. "I'm deciding now." He looked at her for a moment, at the woman who had walked into his shop in a different coat than the one she'd worn to a restaurant that had become a crime scene, who had made decisions under pressure that most people with significantly more preparation would have failed at, who had walked into a boardroom on a broken ankle with bad coffee in her system and 11 hours of no sleep and had dismantled a conspiracy that had been 8 months in the making, who had asked about George Pulaski before she'd asked about herself. "What are you deciding?" he said. "Whether you're someone I want to know." She said it plainly, without performance. "Not—" She paused. "Not in the way that comes with a press release or a thank you speech. I'm not here to make you a hero in a story about me. I'm here because I spent 3 weeks thinking about the last conversation we had in this building, and I wanted to have another one." Nathan leaned his elbows on the counter, looked at the pocket watch between them. "What were you thinking about specifically?" "You said that some things can be fixed if you understand how they were built and what broke them." She nodded at the watch. "You said it the first time we talked, about clocks. But I don't think you were only talking about clocks." He considered that. "I was talking about clocks," he said. "But you're not wrong." She waited. "I'm not easy to know," he said. It wasn't a warning, just a statement of fact, the way he stated most facts. "I work long hours and I have a daughter who is the first priority, and there are parts of my life I don't talk about easily or quickly." He looked up from the watch. "I'm also not particularly impressed by money or position, which probably should have been obvious by the jacket." "The jacket was a choice," she said. "You could have worn something else." "It's a comfortable jacket. It has a tear in the left shoulder." "It's a comfortable jacket with a tear in the left shoulder." She looked at him steadily. "I judged you the moment you sat down. I decided what you were worth before you said a single word." "I know. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to hear me say it directly rather than just—" She stopped. "I come from a world where people don't say things directly because saying things directly costs you leverage. I'm trying to operate differently." A pause. "It's harder than it sounds." "Most things worth doing are," Nathan said. They looked at each other across the counter with the pocket watch between them and the clocks ticking their layered time on every available surface, and the afternoon light coming through the front window at the angle it came through at this time of day, and the particular quiet of a Tuesday in a repair shop in Pilsen that smelled of machine oil and old wood and someone's life built carefully in a small space. "Fix the watch," she said, "and while you fix it, tell me something true, something you don't tell people." He picked up the watch again, turned it in his hands. "When I left the Navy," he said, "I wasn't just leaving for Lily. I was leaving because I was tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Tired of being very good at something that I wasn't always proud of. Tired of the version of myself I'd built for that life." He turned the watch over, ran his thumb across the worn edge of the case. "The clocks were—" He paused. "My father's shop smelled like this. When I was in bad places, and there were bad places, that's the truth of that life. I used to think about that smell, not as a comfort exactly. More as a reminder that there was a world where the things worth caring about were small and specific and repairable. Victoria didn't say anything. "I don't regret what I was," he said. "I just didn't want it to be the only thing I was." He set the watch down. Lily helped with that. Having someone who needed me to be something other than capable of damage. That helped. He looked up. "Your turn." She blinked. "What?" "Something true. Something you don't tell people." She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he wondered if she'd decide not to. Then, "I don't trust easily, and I know it, and I've told myself for years that it's a feature of operating in my industry." She looked at the watch. "But I think the real version is that I've been afraid. Not of specific people or specific situations. I'm not particularly afraid of those. Afraid of building something real with someone and having it turn out to be built on a version of me they invented rather than the actual me." She paused. "Most people who want to be close to Victoria Sterling want to be close to the company, or the position, or the version of me that exists in quarterly reports. The actual me is considerably less impressive and considerably more—" She searched. "Difficult." "You're not that difficult," Nathan said. She raised an eyebrow. "You've known me for 3 weeks. I was unconscious for most of them. You negotiated with me about going back to the restaurant at 3 in the morning. You ate bad coffee without complaining. You taped your own ankle and didn't mention it again." He looked at her. "You asked about George Pulaski before you asked about anything else. Those are data points." She was quiet for a moment. "What do they tell you?" "That the actual version of you is someone worth knowing," he said. "That's not a small thing. A lot of people don't make it to that." The afternoon light moved slightly. A clock somewhere in the shop, a bracket clock on the upper shelf, a particularly resonant one, let the hour pass with a sound like a low, unhurried bell. 3 o'clock, Victoria said. "It's accurate to about 4 seconds a week," Nathan said, "which, for a movement that age, is fairly remarkable. You sound proud of it." "I put 3 weeks into that movement. I'm allowed to be a little proud." She almost smiled. Not the public smile, not the professional one. The small, quick, real one he'd first seen across a candlelit table when he'd mentioned Mrs. Kowalski and the cereal. "The foundation," she said. "You heard about it." "I saw the announcement." Sterling Capital Corporate Trust Initiative. He'd read the press release on his phone between repairs, on a day when Lily was at school and the shop was quiet, and he'd had the particular odd sensation of reading about an event he'd been somewhere adjacent to without appearing in it himself. The foundation was structured to support victims of corporate fraud, with specific provision for small investors who lacked resources to pursue independent legal action. The initial funding was substantial. The board included Patricia Voss, Margaret Chen, and, this had made him set his phone down for a moment, George Pulaski, listed as a community advisory member. He hadn't expected that. He should have. "George called me when he got the letter," Nathan said. He cried a little. He said he was embarrassed about it. "What did you say?" "I said it seemed like a reasonable response." Victoria looked at the counter. "He sent me a card, handwritten. He has very neat handwriting for a man his age." A pause. "He said his wife is doing better, that the stress of the financial situation had been affecting her health, and that since—" She stopped. "He said she's sleeping again." Nathan absorbed that, filed it in the category of things that were not tactical or strategic or relevant to anything except the simple accounting of human cause and effect. The way one thing done carefully in the right direction can create warmth in a place you never expected it to reach. "The event is next month," Victoria said. "The foundation launch. It's at the Meridian Center. I know, I'm aware of the irony of the name. It was booked before everything happened, and rebooking it felt like letting it win." She looked up at him. "I'm not going to ask you to come and stand on a stage and be thanked publicly for something you did because I know you'd rather—" She paused. "What would you rather do?" "Watch from the back," he said. "If I came at all." "Would you?" He looked at the pocket watch on the felt pad. "This will take about 2 weeks. The escapement needs new parts sourced. I know someone in Geneva who carries Japy Frere's components, but it takes time." He picked up a pen and wrote his estimate on the order pad beside the register. You can come by and check progress if you want. That's not an answer to my question. It's an answer to a question, he said. Whether it's the same question is something we can figure out over the next 2 weeks. She looked at him for a moment with the particular directness that was just her. Not aggressive, not performed, just a way of seeing that didn't bother with the usual social deflections. Then she nodded once, the nod of someone who has decided to accept a reasonable proposal. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he agreed. She buttoned her coat, looked at the carriage clock in the window again. The French one, the burgundy. What about it? Does it chime? Every quarter hour, very clear tone. I'll think about it, she said, which they both understood was not the same as no. The bell above the door sounded when she left, the same small bell that announced every arrival and departure, the same bell Lily had accidentally broken and then fixed herself with a rubber band and a paperclip in a repair that was arguably more creative than structurally sound. Nathan had replaced it properly, but kept the rubber band in the drawer beside the register, because some things earned their place in the inventory of a life by being the first attempt rather than the correct one. He stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed, with the pocket watch in front of him and the clocks making their particular collective sound, and he thought about what he'd said to her. Some things can be fixed if you understand how they were built and what broke them, and whether that was true beyond the category of machines with mechanical movements and measurable tolerances. He thought it probably was. He also thought that knowing something was fixable and actually doing the work of fixing it were two different things, and that the second required a longer commitment than the first, and more willingness to be wrong about your progress along the way. He thought about his father's shop and the particular patience of the work, the way you couldn't rush a movement that needed to find its own equilibrium, the way you could only prepare it correctly and then let it run and see. He picked up the pocket watch, opened the case again. The engraving on the inside of the cover, for Robert, with everything, was in a different hand than the initials on the back. A woman's handwriting, or anyway the handwriting of someone who wrote with more flourish than economy. He set it carefully on the felt pad and reached for his tools. A month later, Nathan Cross stood at the back of a room full of people in the Meridian Center and watched Victoria Sterling speak from a podium about what this foundation was for and why it mattered and who it was meant to serve. And she spoke without notes in the clear, direct way she had of saying things when she wasn't performing for a room, but actually talking to it. She mentioned George Pulaski by name. She'd asked him first, he'd told Nathan afterward, and Pulaski had said yes with the uncomplicated acceptance of a man who had decided that being named in a room full of people wasn't the embarrassing thing. The embarrassing thing was what had happened to him, and this wasn't that. Nathan stood near an exit column with his hands in the pockets of a jacket that was not the faded one. This one was newer. Lily had insisted on it after a brief but highly motivated negotiation campaign that had coincided with and possibly been related to the campaign for the dog, which had ultimately resolved in favor of a medium-sized dog named Sprocket, who had been with them for 2 weeks and had already broken one lamp and stolen Nathan's left shoe on 3 separate occasions. He watched Victoria from across the room. She hadn't looked for him yet. She was working, doing the thing she was built to do, the thing that she was genuinely remarkable at, the organized and rigorous and occasionally ruthless work of building something that mattered and keeping it honest. She found him near the end, when the formal part was over and the room was moving into the loose social configuration of events winding down. She crossed the room without making a production of it, just the direct movement of someone who has identified where they're going and is going there, and stopped beside him at the column. "You're wearing a different jacket," she said. "My daughter staged an intervention." Smart kid. Terrifyingly so. He looked at her. "Good speech." "I meant what I said." "I know you did. That's why it was good." They stood beside the column for a moment, watching the room with its people and its sound and its particular energy of a new thing beginning rather than an old thing ending, and neither of them said anything for long enough that it stopped being a pause and became something else, the comfortable silence of 2 people who had stopped needing to fill the space between them. "Side entrance?" Victoria said. "Side entrance," he agreed. They left the way they'd always moved best, quietly, without announcement, through the door that led to the ordinary night rather than the lit stage of the main exit. The Chicago air was cold and clear and tasted of the lake and the particular metallic edge of a city in autumn, and the street outside was indifferent and enormous, and going about its business with no interest in either of them. Victoria put her hand through his arm as they walked. Not a grand gesture, just a practical adjustment to the cold, or anyway, that was one way to read it. And Nathan Cross was a man who had learned that the way you read things shaped what they became, and he chose to read it as what it was: two people choosing the same direction, at the same pace, through the same dark. There are things you can plan for and things you can't. Nathan had understood this longer and more completely than most people, and had organized his life accordingly, prepared for the unpredictable, honest about the limits of his own foresight, suspicious of any version of certainty that required you to ignore what was actually in front of you. What was in front of him now was uncomplicated and considerable, and he didn't try to make it smaller than it was, because small minds made things smaller, and he was trying, in all the ordinary ways and some of the harder ones, not to do that. Lily was home with Mrs. Kowalski and Sprocket. The pocket watch, RS, for Robert, with everything, was running accurately in the drawer of Victoria's desk at Sterling Capital, keeping the time it had been built to keep, restored not to perfect but to honest, which was the only kind of restoration that lasted. The city moved around them. The streetlights did their patient yellow work. They walked.